So,
Hey, hi everybody. My name is Jordan Roberts. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm super excited. This is my first time in Florence, and so it's already been a great experience. This is my second conference I've attended, but my first conference internationally, and also my first conference presenting my work by myself. So it's going to be interesting. Thank you. Go to bed. Okay, great. All right, so today, so like they said, I attend Brigham Young University in Utah, in the United States, and I actually just finished my teacher education program for my master's degree. And so I'm presenting my master's thesis today that I've spent the last around 2 years on. And so my study is called The Perspectives and Experiences of Emergent Bilingual Parents concerning their engagement with their children's teachers in schools. And so when I say emergent bilingual parents, the definition is any parent of students who has English not as their first language, so they're still learning English. And in the United States, with our context, we have lots of Spanish speakers, and so that will be the group of emergent bilingual parents that I'm referring to most often. And I also have the names of my thesis committee members that I want to acknowledge as well that has helped me with my study that couldn't be here today. Dr. Alessandra Rossborough, Dr. Juan Freire, and Dr. Jennifer Wimmer, who are professors also at BYU. There, awesome. So this is a picture of me my first year of teaching 4 years ago. In Utah, I was an intern for my first year, and I had 8 different English language learners in my classroom, which is kind of a big ratio for only having 20 students in my class in the United States. And since I was a first year teacher, I wanted a lot of help from parents just because I was still learning. And so I asked one of my students, her name is Maria. She had just moved to the States from Colombia the year prior. And so I asked her mom if she'd be willing to help out in the classroom, volunteer, go on field trips, that sort of thing. And she said yes, and I don't speak any Spanish, and she only spoke Spanish, so we did this through either translators or using her daughter as a translator, and I loved having her in the classroom. It was a big help to me, and she really liked it too. And we became quite close. And later on in the school year, she confided in me through a translator that she had never before been invited to participate in any way, shape, or form in her students' classrooms. And she had lots of kids already go through elementary school. So that was really surprising to me, made me a little sad. And this experience was really the catalyst for creating this study and these research questions. I was very interested in the multicultural education field and figuring out why these Spanish-speaking parents were not being as included in their children's classrooms as maybe they could be. So this is just a little overview of what I will be presenting today. In just a second, I'll go over my research questions and a little bit my theoretical framework as she already described. But I'm going to spend most of the time talking about my methods, how I collect the data, as well as the findings and discussion, and the implications for future use of this topic. So on this slide, I have at the beginning the aim of my study. And just a little context again, as a teacher in the States, most of the teachers there are English-speaking white female teachers. That's most of the educators. However, the student body is much more diverse. We have lots of different language, lots of different backgrounds represented. And so to keep that in mind as I'm describing my study. And so this causes a lot of language barriers and potential cultural differences between the students and their teachers. So I really wanted to focus on, for my participants, these Spanish-speaking parents at the school district. I wanted to focus on their voice and really see their perspectives. So these are my research questions for my study. I split it into 2 different questions. The first question is about the parents' experiences. So I just wanted to know anything about their experiences interacting with their children's teachers or school or administration in any way. And then the second question was focused on more of what their expectations or preferences were. So how would they prefer a teacher to reach out to them? What language would they want material sent home in, different things like that. And so I wanted to see what's actually happening in the schools with that school and parent engagement, and then how the parents might want it different or what worked well for them. So this is my theoretical framework, as I've already described a little bit. So I use Vygotsky's sociocultural theory and Freire's critical theory. These are very prevalent theories in the topic of multicultural education. And so I chose to use Vygotsky's theory because he really focuses on using language as a mediational tool. And so I was looking at, how can teachers utilize these parents' language, but also in my methods, as I'll describe later, when I was collecting data, I was using their language, their native language, and using that as a mediational tool, as you would using Vygotsky's theory. And then Freire's critical theory is also a very important part because we want teachers to have that critical awareness. Freire often calls it conscientization. So we want them thinking critically about their parent engagement practices. And then when these theories are combined together, they make critical sociocultural theory. So just a couple of notes from my literature review, some things to know about what's been done in the past on this topic. Most of the research that is on parent engagement in the States focuses on what teachers can do to help parents, but to help them assimilate to the mainstream culture. So it's not really always valuing the skills and the culture of these parents as they come to these schools. And so researchers in this field, to try and combat this, are calling for teachers to really learn about their emergent bilingual families' culture, so their students, parents, and language, and keeping that in mind when they are interacting with them throughout the school year and starting that relationship and those parent engagement tactics. Another thing to keep in mind is that most studies that have been done, there are some similar studies to mine, but how they're a little different is most of them were one-on-one interviews with a parent. So they get a lot of information from one Spanish-speaking parent or one emergent bilingual parent. So I wanted to take it back a little more and see what data we could find if we had a couple more participants and put them all in a room together and have them interact together to see what conversations could come up and if we could find any more data and kind of discuss and learn from their experiences together. Okay, so as I dive into my methods, just a little bit more background again with the United States context. This study was done in rural Utah, which is like in the southwest of the United States. And so there are lots of English language learners in the States, but in this particular region, it's mainly Spanish speakers. So that was the demographic that I was working with, and that was represented in my experience as a teacher at the time. And I do want to say I myself do not speak Spanish, which added a little bit of a trial, I guess you could say, with this study. But it was very important to me because I knew I was going to have students who came from that background. And there are many teachers that are in the same position as me where they do not speak the native language of their students. But we want to make sure that they are still making those interactions with them and their parents, because parent engagement has shown lots of research with helping students in their school and helping their families. So emergent bilinguals need to not be excluded from that assistance as well. And so since I did not speak Spanish for the study, I had 5 Spanish-speaking parents with students enrolled in the same school district. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I had one focus group with all the participants, and then I did individual interviews with each participant as a form of member checking. So if they didn't feel comfortable talking about something in the focus group, or I was able to ask for clarifying questions to really make sure that I was getting exactly what they were saying and not what they think I wanted to hear. I really just wanted to hear their experiences and their perspectives. And so in that data collection process, I had a team of translators that were native Spanish speakers working with me, one of which was a very big part of the study. She helped me a lot. I definitely wouldn't have been able to do it without her. But another benefit of having her involved in the study was she came from a very similar background and obviously spoke the same language as my 5 participants. And so she really helped them to feel comfortable and to really share their experiences, and they felt like they had someone in the room they kind of already knew. And so that actually impacted the study and really, I feel like, help the participants feel comfortable and just say what their experiences have been. Okay, so for my data analysis, I'm going to kind of walk through what I did with the data after I finished the focus group and the interviews. So I created something that I called a data matrix, which is just the fancy Google Sheet that I created to store my codes and some of the transcriptions from the focus groups. And so we had the transcripts. I allowed participants to speak in their native language. I wanted them to speak in Spanish and feel comfortable. And so once I had my translating team translate all the transcriptions to make sure that they were accurate, I was able to put some of the quotes from the transcripts onto this data matrix. And that's kind of what I used to organize all my coding. And so some of the transcripts were coded for keywords that I took from my literature review. And then I also coded by my 2 research questions. And then those were relating to other things that I'd found in the literature review. And then from that data matrix, once I coded everything, I highlighted specific quotes from the transcripts that really exemplified certain themes that I was looking for, or maybe emergent themes that I wasn't quite expecting. And I was able to put those on another data matrix and kind of cross-examine for similarities and differences in these responses and codes. And through this entire coding process, my 8 priority codes that I was kind of looking for were themes of either inclusion or exclusion, and hoping to find both, obviously wanting to be more inclusion, but really zoning in on those patterns of exclusion, what is happening with them, and what can educators do to kind of shift that narrative a little bit. So here I have some of my emergent themes listed that came out of my data analysis. There were so many findings from the study that I could have shared, but I chose 5 I felt that were most relevant to this audience. And so these are the first 2, first being lack of access or inequity. And I'll talk more in depth about these as I go through my presentation. And then the emergent bilingual parents were, when they came to the country or came to a new school that was only English speaking, they were first unfamiliar with kind of the culture of the school, how it works. Things are done a certain way in the United States. Most people just go to schools knowing that because they were raised there or they speak English as their native language. And so it kind of creates this unknown how to culture, like how to communicate with teachers or how to sign up their kids. Like you have to re-register them every year, no matter how long you've lived there. So there's certain things that they need to know as part of that culture. And so the parents are not being taught how to engage with the school in this way. And so what we see from that, schools are not asking or thinking about these emergent bilingual parents, what help they need or what access to resources that they might not know they have. So these are the other 3 themes. And so consistent and ongoing communication between the teacher and parent was seen as most effective. So it wasn't just one-sided, and it was kind of like this ongoing conversation that they could pick up at any time. And then also that schools can use these parents' voices, especially because they're coming from a marginalized minority group, and use their ideas or use their preferences instead of just having them conform to that mainstream school culture that I was describing. And then I have the last one to italicize because this was probably the most emergent theme. I did not expect to find this at all. I thought it was very interesting. The participants themselves were actually the ones that said student identity, which that's not really a word that would come up in normal conversation. And so I described this as incorporating students' culture into the classroom curriculum or into the school's functions. And this was important because some of the participants were explaining different experiences they had where they had like a student with one teacher or they had a school who really made an effort to connect with these parents and allow them to kind of share their culture and language, whether that was in a big school event or like in a project, just in one classroom where the student got to share where they were from or about their language. And it made a really big impact on these parents. A lot of them were emotional talking about it and said that it really helped their student find their identity and their place in their new school, especially since they were the minority, they were still learning English, and that could be a really hard experience for students. And so right now, as I explain that mainstream culture that I'm referring to, in the United States, parents are usually the ones expected to reach out to teachers. Obviously, educators are busy, but in the United States, that responsibility is more so put on the parents to reach out to the teachers if they have any questions or want to know about their students' grades or anything like that. And so we were exploring that notion with these parents and seeing how their expectations aligned with that or how they were different and asking questions about it. So this is a data flow chart where I put my themes and findings into. Obviously, it is very big and a little complicated. And because of time, we're not going to go through all of it today, but I just kind of wanted to show you how, as I'm going through and highlighting some of these themes, how they fit all together. And so you'll see it kind of is more macro or universal topics and issues at the on this side, and then as you go through, it gets more and more micro, more specific to my actual participants' experiences. And so I started with keywords, parent-school relationship, and then equity and cultural differences. And then we went to topics, the 3 different kinds of engagement. So parent engagement, when a parent reaches out to an educator or the school, and then teacher engagement, which is when the teacher's reaching out to the parent, and then school system engagement, which is just a little bit more general, any engagement within the school system. And then I separated that into subtopics, again, looking for patterns of inclusion or exclusion. And then I have different characteristics that we were looking for and combined with some emergent codes that we found. And then those are what created my themes, which is what I will be going over. And I also had examples listed that I will also share a couple from. So for my findings, I'm just going to share a couple quotes that show a certain theme, and then I'll go back to how they fit into that data flow chart, and then I'll talk about their significance or the implications. So these first 2 quotes were from the focus group transcript when we were talking about parent-teacher conferences. So in the United States, that's a very big part of engagement. So at the end of every quarter, when grades are due, parents will come in, and on one night, the teacher will meet with every single of their students' parents for like 10 minutes and kind of just go over how they're doing and going over their grades. And so when I was asking what my participants, what their experiences were, they said that they did not even know that they had access to translators at these conferences. So a lot of times they would not attend because they just did not know how they were going to speak in Spanish to their children's teacher that only spoke English. Another participant said, if we as parents do not know that you, the interpreters, are available, then we're not going to use your services. So going back into the data flow chart, this quote was highlighting the theme lack of access or inequity to translated materials or translators, as I explained. And this is from a pattern of exclusion, and it's kind of teacher engagement and school system engagement together. So with my findings being called lack of access, participants were unfamiliar with that school culture, kind of weren't taught how the ways to communicate with the teacher. My participants mentioned that they became more involved in their students' education when that consistent back and forth communication was there. So the teacher, it's a combination of them reaching out to the teacher and the teacher reaching out to them. And they also mentioned having communication through newsletters, either sent home with the student or via email, and then face-to-face conversations at school or even informal meetings. So a lot of these participants said that they work a lot of jobs, and so they're not always able to come to set meetings, but they found a lot of success in just finding their teacher after school pickup when they were standing outside for bus duty and just being able to talk to them when they saw them and having those important informal conversations. So this next quote is talking about student identity, as I described earlier. This is also from the focus group transcript. And at this point during the focus group, I was discussing with the participants how their children's teachers had included their students' language or culture. So this particular participant who this quote was from was talking about how happy her son was, that he had a project where he was able to pick a country and talk about it. And so he had just moved from Peru, so he was really excited to talk about that. But she did also mention, she said, but that was the only thing. I don't think teachers have done anything else outside projects or different things to engage and involve in our culture. And so that was one good experience, but we're noticing that it is definitely not the forefront of our children's curriculum in the United States. So again, this is more from a theme of inclusion, but also it can be viewed in an exclusion way, because that's not those types of projects and things that are incorporating student identity are not at the forefront of the education. So they're kind of taking a backseat in a way. So it could also be viewed as exclusion. So this is just one more slide of my findings also about student identity. Something I had my participants do was effective communication between the parent and teacher. And so they talked about receiving materials in Spanish and English, as well as consistent communication such as weekly emails. So again, I kind of went over most of this, but I just split it up with my discussion of how I answered those research questions. So the first one, finding out what their expectations or their experiences were, and the second one, what their expectations were as well. Then I pretty much already went over this, that the big takeaway point is that emergent bilingual parents are not being part of this known school culture, that they're being expected to reach out when that is not their experience, where they're coming from. So in conclusion, there's limited literature in this topic that really focuses on the voices of these parents and how they orient towards full participation. I want to make sure that it's more like a bridge and that the parents and teachers are meeting in the middle rather than the other group going towards the other side. And then with my implications, these can be very important for teachers because it's going to help them in their parent engagement practices. And it also passively gives these parents a voice as well. So these are my references from the paper that I did for this conference, as well as my references I did throughout the presentation. And then I just wanted to thank you for your time and thank you to my participants that participated and my research committee, and as well as my translator, her name is Jessica. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.